Mary, lovely to have you on the programme. It's been a couple of weeks since we've spoken. Thank you for joining me. There are quite a few things happening, especially with this Russian warship sunk in a suspected Storm Shadow missile attack, and Kiev launching a major air offensive after 30 killed in what's been called a barbaric attack. Just bring us up to date on the Ukraine-Russia conflict war, if you would, Mary.
Well, as so often in Russia-Ukraine, it's quite difficult to judge which is actually the effect and which is the response. In other words, who acted first and why the next thing happened. We had the Storm Shadow attack on what was described as a Russian warship, but appears to have been an amphibious vessel, not necessarily a warship. And the significance in military terms of that ship being hit is not entirely clear. How much damage, if any, it does to the Russian war effort. Obviously, psychologically and politically, it makes quite a big difference, maybe slightly less to Russia, but for Ukraine, it makes a big difference because it gives them a sort of symbolic victory and a plus at a time when things were maybe not going that well. Then we come on to the air attacks that were launched by Russia on Friday morning, which were the biggest air attacks on Ukraine, on really a big selection of Ukrainian cities, which included Kiev and Kharkiv, Lviv, right in the west. There haven't been air attacks on that scale from Russia on Ukraine. And, you can argue maybe it was in response to the attack on the ship. Maybe it was a warning, if you like, in advance of the new year. Maybe it was coupled, there've been rumors that Russia was proposing some sort of ceasefire over some sort of truce over New Year. That was rejected this time last year. Maybe it's not even going to be proposed this year, but maybe this was a sort of Russian warning in connection with that. And then today we've had the response from Ukraine, which has been air attacks across the border into Russia, into places that were familiar from really quite a few months ago when there were the last attacks from Ukraine, places like Belgorod, and the region of Bryansk. Those are both border regions. And it's not really clear how much damage. The damage seems to have been limited.
Okay, very interesting. In Israel, of course, we've had the Israeli forces bombarding Khan Yunis, as Gaza officials saying nearly 200 people have been killed in 24 hours. Now, Gaza officials, of course, are Hamas officials. We need to be having a sceptical mind when it comes to those numbers, although the United Nations often say that Hamas generally tell the truth about the numbers of people who've been killed. But clearly what has happened in the last couple of weeks is that, and over Christmas as well, is a really, really bloody escalation, really, of what's been going on, Mary.
No, absolutely. And, we're getting all sorts of indications that the Americans in particular, as Israel's patron and chief ally, have been trying to rein in Israel, have been trying to warn them and say, this is not good for your own self-interest. And there was a UN resolution last week which the United States, almost for the first time, didn't veto. The purpose of which was to improve aid conditions and to speed up deliveries of aid. And of course, if there's going to be this increased attacks by Israel on the southern part of Gaza, that means it makes it much, much more difficult for aid to get into Gaza. And there's a question that's been at the back of my mind, for the last few weeks, which is there's a big clamour for the US to put pressure on Israel. And we can see that in some respects, certainly President Biden, Secretary of State and others, there are all sorts of indications that that is what they're trying to do, both behind the scenes and to an extent in public. But it's not at all clear to me that the US actually has the sort of leverage that people are assuming it does. Israel's basically been carrying on regardless. There's very little evidence that it's been bowing to those requests, even from the US.
Mary, just one other event outside the UK I want to mention briefly. This is, you mentioned President Biden there. Of course, he is looking towards 2024, and in November we will have the American election. It's something like 3/4 of the Western world is going to the polls in 2024. There are loads of elections, European election, UK election, American election, India is going to the polls, Ireland's going to the polls, lots and lots of different places. Maine, the state of Maine, has apparently disqualified Donald Trump from a presidential primary ballot, citing the insurrection clause. There have been a couple of states that have certainly tried to do this. What is your assessment of whether you imagine Trump will be on the ballot, certainly in most states, or even go on to become the then 47th president of the United States, having been the 45th?
Well, it's very interesting that states, as it were, are taking the initiative in trying to block Trump from even getting into the primary stage. How successful they'll be is another matter. We've had Colorado, and now we've got Maine. We may have other states, but we'll have states where Trump will be allowed on the ballot. There are two things that are interesting and that aren't clear to me. One of them is this is going to be challenged through the courts. Is it going to be challenged through the courts just at state level, or could it go right up to the US Supreme Court? And the other thing is just a sort of constitutional, slightly constitutional, maybe it looks a peripheral interest, but it's not. I have never understood why the states can have their own sort of voting systems and voting criteria, even for the highest federal office,
yes,
which
indeed.
is the presidency.
Yes.
Why isn't there a single rule for federal office? And this may be a question which comes back really to haunt this coming election.
I think that's a very good point. A great quiz question, Mary, a bit of trivia on presidential election. I wonder if you know the answer to this. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm just about to. There's only one, if Trump were to become the 47th president of the United States, having been the 45th as well, there's only one other president who was president, then wasn't president, and became president for a second term, two non-consecutive, or any non-consecutive terms, because it wasn't always just 2 terms. Do you know who it is?
No, you tell me.
Grover Cleveland. There we are. There's a little bit of useless knowledge for you, Mary, on a Saturday afternoon.
No, I'll hoard it up for next time.
After your incredibly useful knowledge that you've imparted to us on those foreign affairs stories. Mary, thank you very much indeed. Mary Dejevsky there, Foreign Affairs columnist.